There are mornings that are no different from any other, and there are mornings that, like an innocent crack in glass, turn into a crack in your entire world. My morning began perfectly ordinary. Evelyn Gray, 34 years old, make coffee at exactly 6:30, turn on the news channel, check my to-do list for the day, and whisper to myself that today, everything will be under control. Control, that was a word I liked. It was my anchor. A job as an adjuster at a major insurance company, a house in Willow Creek, a neat townhouse with white shutters and a small garden, neighbors I considered friends. Life ran on schedule, and I liked it that way. That Tuesday, I left the house in my usual rush, laptop in my bag, lunch container, thoughts of meetings and deadlines. Mason, my husband, had been working from home for the past year. His makeshift office in the guest room had become his fortress. "See you tonight, love," he called after me, and the familiar words sounded as mundane as ever. I didn't even notice how, mid-sentence, something inside me clicked, a faint, elusive discomfort, as if someone had quietly shifted a picture on the wall, and for a moment, you feel the emptiness behind it. At work, familiar routine, calls, policies, client objections, scan forms. Everything was running smoothly, and yet, a feeling of unease, like a persistent fly, refused to leave me. I chalked it up to fatigue, to poor sleep. But by noon, sorting folders before a meeting, I realized I had left an important packet of documents at home. Those very papers without which I couldn't give my afternoon presentation. A small mistake, a stupid rush. No one would have noticed if not for one, but I had to go home. That meant 20 minutes there and back. 15, if everything went perfectly. I called Mason just in case, to say I'd be an hour late. The line was busy. Another sign, insignificant, but the lump in my throat grew tighter. I sent a short message. "I'll be back in an hour. Put dinner on the table, okay?" And sent it. No reply. Strange, but possible. Maybe he was on a call, a damn conference, or just stuck in emails. I didn't dramatize it and stepped outside. The drive home took less time than I thought. Willow Creek smelled of damp earth and freshly cut grass. Those scents that always brought me back to myself, reminded me that the world was still whole. But as I pulled into the driveway, my heart stopped for a fraction of a second. Harper's car was parked in front of my house. Harper Sloan, my neighbor across the street. Blonde hair, a smile she always saved for Sunday coffees, 2 small children, a husband named Carter, a kind, slightly awkward mechanic from the factory. They seemed like the classic neighbor couple. Kids, Sunday barbecues, mutual favors. Harper never parked at my place. She always left her car across the street, like all decent neighbors. But today her car, that same silver SUV, was in my driveway. I sat in the car for a moment, listening to something buzzing inside me, like a thin wire being pulled tighter. Maybe she just stopped by for a minute. Maybe Carter had car trouble, and she just decided to drop in. The voice of reason whispered the most banal explanations. But my animal instincts whispered something else. I closed my eyes and, gripping the steering wheel, counted to 10. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was nothing. The key in the lock made its familiar click, and the house greeted me not with coziness, but with a stifling silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean the absence of people, but the presence of something hidden. Breakfast sat in the sink, as if I had just left. Half-empty coffee cup, spoon left in the rush. But no music, no laughter, none of the little domestic sounds that usually fill my home. "Mason," I called, though I already knew I'd be waiting for an answer. Silence. I walked into the living room, looked into the garden. Nothing, just the swings swaying gently in the wind. Where was Harper? Why was her car here? Why wasn't she in the house across the street? Slowly, as if in a dream, I climbed the stairs. Each step echoed in my chest. The air smelled of damp towels and shampoo, a scent I knew too well. It lived in our closets, in the soap dish, in the little things that made up our daily life. But today, that scent was alien, as if someone had taken a piece of my world and twisted it, showing me how thin the line was between mine and not mine. The bedroom door was ajar. From beneath it, like a fine powder, came the sound of running water and quiet voices. My heart, which usually beat with confidence, suddenly raced into panic. I stood in the hallway, feeling the world around me begin to rearrange itself into new, alien lines. Something inside screamed, "Don't open it." But another part, the one that craved truth at any cost, pushed me forward. I took a deep breath, gripping the key in my pocket tighter. For a moment, everything slowed down. The sound of footsteps on the carpet, whispers, water droplets, flickering light through the glass. And in that slowdown, I realized one bitter truth. What I would find behind that door wouldn't just break my trust, it would shatter the picture of the world in which I had lived. I was faced with a choice to call the Joker or remain blind. I stepped forward. Then the door opened slightly, and the silence filled with the last, innocent sound, a quiet sigh before the storm. There are seconds, tiny, almost imperceptible, when you can still turn back. When fate generously gives you a chance to close your eyes, pretend the mistake doesn't exist, and go on living as if nothing happened. I stood before the bathroom door in just such a second. But the choice I made had already been decided for me long before my hand touched the cold metal handle. First, I heard Harper's voice, a soft, almost tender laugh, the kind I knew from our Sunday get-togethers. But now, that laugh sounded different, intimate, forbidden. Then her whisper, soft, warm, the kind I thought she could only use with her own husband. I don't remember how I pushed the door open. Maybe I did it too slowly. So slowly that for a moment, it seemed as if the air inside the room had settled, become heavier, denser, like thick syrup that couldn't be breathed. And I saw them. Not just bodies, not just betrayal, but two people who, just that morning, had smiled at me as if I were the closest to them. My husband, my friend, in my bathroom, in my reality. They didn't hear the door open. They were too absorbed, too entangled in their own lies. But when Harper turned her head and our eyes met, time tore its fabric. The expression on her face, from pleasure to horror, changed in a fraction of a second, but that moment was forever seared into my memory. Mason froze, as if his muscles refused to obey his brain. He tried to say something, and perhaps if he had said something meaningful, I would have snapped, screamed, cried. But he only said, "Evie," as if my name could glue back together what had already been destroyed. But here's what surprised me most. The tears didn't come. The pain didn't come. Instead, a cold silence spread through my body, icy, inhuman, almost artificial. Only one thought appeared in my head: act. I spoke words in a voice I didn't recognize. "Don't move." Harper screamed. Mason tried to get up. "Evelyn, wait." His voice was faltering, guilty, but desperately pathetic. I stepped toward the door and, as if in some strange movie, turned the lock from the inside. The click echoed in the room like a gunshot. "You'll stay here," I said calmly. "I need to make a couple of calls." Silence. Panic. The faint splash of water, as if mocking what I call my home just an hour ago. I closed the door, and only then, already in the hallway, when the hot steam was replaced by the cool air of the bedroom, did a new awareness enter me. I was standing on the border between life before and life after, and there was no way back. I walked to the nightstand, picked up the phone, and opened the contacts list. The name that used to bring only friendly smiles had today turned into a weapon. Neighbor. Harper's husband. A man who trusted her. As I had trusted. We were both part of the same illusion, and today, that illusion cracked in two houses at once. My fingers didn't tremble. Surprisingly, they were perfectly calm, as if someone else was controlling them for me. I pressed the call button. A thin, long beep. Second. Third. "Carter? Hi. It's Evelyn. I think you should come over." "Yes, right now. No explanations. No dramatic speeches. Just facts. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need vocal flourishes. It is louder than any scream." When I hung up, I didn't go to the bathroom door. I didn't say a word to Mason. I just stood by the window and watched the cars pass by, as if the world outside my house remained the same. Calm, normal. But something else had already begun inside me. Something irreversible. And I knew. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of my story. Carter arrived faster than I expected. Maybe fate was speeding things up. Maybe he already felt something was wrong. We rarely notice storms brewing, but we always sense the smell of thunder. His old Ford pulled up to my house and stopped abruptly, as if the car, too, understood. This wasn't just a conversation. He got out, slammed the door a little louder than necessary. His face was tense, but not yet suspicious. That anxiety people call intuition was just beginning to stir beneath his skin. "Evelyn?" His voice was steady, but cracks were already audible. I opened the door, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to apologize for anything. "Go upstairs," I said calmly. "They're there." He froze, blinked in shock. "Who's they?" At that moment, I realized, right now, I was taking away from him the same illusion that had just died in me. "Mason and Harper." Just 3 words. They struck him harder than if I had spoken 1,000 explanations. As he climbed the stairs, he walked as if to an execution. But not his own, the execution of his past feelings. His face grew harder, darker with each step, and I saw something in him break even before he knew the truth for sure. He heard the water and understood everything without seeing. But he kept going, because once the truth has touched you, you have to look it in the face or remain blind forever. He pushed open the bathroom door, and everything that happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, so slowly that each second burned like a knife on an open wound. Harper screamed first, not out of guilt, out of fear of being seen. Mason tried to jump out of the bathtub, but Carter shoved him back so roughly that water splashed across the tiles. "Are you serious?" "In my house." He roared, but it wasn't a question. It was an accusation to the universe. Harper was crying, covering herself with a towel, but her sobs sounded false, as if she were trying to play a role she could no longer hold. Mason reached out to me. "Evie, please, we need to talk." Talk. Funny how useless a word seems in a moment when everything has already been said. I stood perfectly still, as if my body had already stopped belonging to the feelings that should have torn me apart. I said quietly, almost in a whisper, but so that everyone could hear, "You destroyed everything I believed in. Now look each other in the eye and try to explain why." Carter turned to Harper, and there was no hatred in his gaze, only emptiness. The kind that scares the most. Emptiness means love is erased. Forever. "It's not what you think." Harper was trembling. "You have no idea what I'm thinking right now," he replied quietly. That silence was scarier than a scream. Mason looked at me like a man who, for the first time, understands what he has lost. Not the affair, not the trust, me. And I said something I had never heard myself say before. "I don't want to hear excuses. I've seen the truth. Everything else is garbage." At that moment, I didn't feel pain. I felt power. The kind of inner, real power a person gets when they stop being weak. It took me a second to realize. I wasn't falling apart. I was being reborn. I turned and left the room, leaving them alone with their own ruin. Carter stayed inside. He needed his own destruction, his own silence, his own scream that hadn't yet been born. On the stairs, I stopped. The silence of the house now sounded different, like new air. And for the first time in many years, I felt something strange, almost indecent, relief. As if someone inside me had pressed reset. And in that second, I became someone else. Not a betrayed wife, not a quiet neighbor, not a woman who believes words, but a woman who finally sees.